Start stream. Okay, so it should be live now.
Okay.
Let's see here. Let's go to my channel. Yeah, so it looks like it's live. All right. So, the final thing that I want to talk about on this, as far as a review of it, was having children have independence of like authority, right?
Yeah. That's the final point in his list of things that he teaches.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's sort of related to the prior points. Well, what it is specifically is that there's no privacy. There's nowhere to hide.
Right. Or a feeling of nowhere to hide at the very least.
Yeah. But that's the idea, is what he teaches students, right? It's not necessarily that he's giving them truths about the world. It's that he's training them along certain lines, and that's the reason why he left his profession.
Right. Okay. Yeah, no, I could definitely agree with that. Like, especially, I don't know about in Canadian schools, but especially in American schools, like, it is definitely, like, yeah, you can't do that because we'll find out. We'll do this. We'll do that. Like, we'll tell your parents all that stuff. So, did you have that experience in Canadian schools, or were they more lenient?
We definitely had a few cases where it's clear that they didn't know what had happened. A few misadventures, we'll say, where they did not pick the correct culprit. And in one case, it was somebody who deliberately did not say that they had picked the wrong culprit. He took the fall quite nobly. But it's definitely probably more of a thing now than ever, really, because now once the schools had ceased a lot of the bullying, at least up here, and there were certain people who would like act out, and then someone else would kind of put them in their place and maybe go a little bit further beyond that. But a lot of the people that I went to school with, there were people who would start fights with each other, but I didn't see anything that was like as bad as some of the stories I've heard from people elsewhere. But there definitely are instances of so basically the bullying crusade has extended onto behavior outside of school, because with the internet that behavior is all visible.
Right.
And so we really are reaching a time when there really is nowhere to hide, as long as somebody's nearby with a cell phone or any kind of camera,
As long as
any kind of recording device.
And there's cameras, yeah.
Well, and there always are cameras, right? As long as somebody's using the camera,
yeah,
then there's nowhere to hide, and there's never any guarantee that they won't be.
I don't know if you had this experience, but like, there was an interesting shift as I was going to school. So like when I was in elementary school, right, there was still this sort of no one likes tattletales sort of thing. And when I was in high school and middle school, I found then it was like, oh, you should always tell like when someone's doing something bad. And I think it was just before like 9/11 when that like really started to happen. That mentality that, oh, you always need to tell someone something, if you see something, say something type mentality, and making sure that the student body was basically spying on themselves.
That's honestly a classic authoritarian tactic, right?
Yeah.
There's no greater weapon that you can use than members of one's own social circle against them. And once that is established, once you don't know who's going to rat you out, and you don't have that layer of trust, then everybody behaves exactly as you want them to. It's sort of its own self-sustaining panopticon. Like it's interesting that we've allowed it to progress to that. Maybe because it's happened so slowly.
Perhaps, but I think I don't know. I think it was like a very it was like an institutional change at some point. I don't know when that took place. Hmm.
In any case, though, the idea is that as you don't really have any time that's not spent being watched over by the administration, there's no real time for you to explore anything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's extended out. Again, like as time has gone on, it's become more and more restrictive, such that if you have a kid playing out in the front yard, there are places in the States where, and it's not everywhere, but there are places in the States now where your neighbors will call Child Protective Services because you're not out in your front lawn
Watching your
with your
child.
eyes glued to your child the entire time, right? There's no opportunity for them to get out and do their own thing. All recreation now for the quote unquote good parents is you enrolling your child in something structured so that they constantly have somebody watching over them and
Yeah,
telling them what to do.
and to some degree, I think like Strucker like going as part of education, right? Like going to like structured environments is good. So, uh, let's take like do you have like Boy Scouts? Did you have Boy Scouts up in Canada?
Yeah.
So like Boy Scouts is a perfect example of like a structured event, like structured time where you're like going for instruction and like it's something for you to do, right? That's structured. Um,
But the
but the, but
okay.
even in those circumstances, there's still like there is like, oh well, now you have to accomplish this goal, and here's some suggestions on how to accomplish that goal, but it's still up to you on how to do the thing,
Wait,
right?
I was gonna say the badges are an example of objectives that you can accomplish in any order in any manner that you wish, right?
Right.
As long as you hit the criteria. It's more of a method of training a sort of problem solving and initiative, as opposed to, when you get enrolled in a sport and you come out here for these games this many times a week and you play by these rules with these people against those people, and the entire thing is sort of decided for you beforehand, and
Mm-hmm.
it was decided before you even joined, really.
Mm-hmm.
um, and so there's nothing for you to consider other than like things within the context of the game. And I'm not even sitting here trying to badmouth sports. I think they're great, but they there's a way to do it in which people are actually using and developing skills outside of, you know the sort of purely athletic ones. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you want to play a pickup game in your neighborhood, you have to know people, you have to figure out where they are, you have to consider their schedules. And it's not anything major, but it's something that you have to do on your own, or you have to find out who's going to do it.
Right.
And the person who's doing it is now, at least in some small way, taking on a bit of a leadership or managerial role where they have to kind of wrangle everybody together.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
Meanwhile,
like, so when I was younger, I used to do BMX riding, like BMX bikes, right?
yeah,
And yeah, there was this like, it was just this like lot, a like dirt lot that we used to go to, and it was the same thing. Like someone was like, "Hey, I'm gonna do it. Like, who wants to come? Like, Terry and Bill are coming or whatever,
yeah.
and do you want to go?" And like yeah, and it's a commitment that you're making to peers that has nothing to do with any authority or any like any governing body.
Well, and it's the things that can happen when everything's not nailed down, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're riding your bikes out in the woods, or maybe you decide you're going to go down that slope into the ravine,
Right.
and maybe you accomplish it, maybe you did it, right? You took a risk and it paid off, and you did something that your friends think is really cool, and they'll talk about that for a few weeks, and then you'll do something crazier, and eventually you'll hit the other uh, result of your actions, which is
Right.
that you'll fall and you'll break something, or you'll sprain something, or something like that, right? and that's you sort of being humbled in your pursuit.
Right.
And those things are important for you to do and overcome. I guess this is getting a little bit into Nietzsche here, right? But the idea that you're going to structure something so that everybody does something safe all the time weakens them, because you're taking away their ability to fail and then grow from that failure.
Hmm.
You're taking away their ability to struggle and to run into hardships of their own making,
Right.
or at least you're diminishing the size of those things.
Right. That makes sense. But another example actually to that was when I was a kid. There was like a pond, right?
Yeah.
It was in a park. It was like really safe. It was like next to a fire station, right? So anything that bad happened, like there is like medical assistance like right there. You can just
Sure.
go to the fire station basically.
Yeah.
But we were playing on the frozen lake because we were kids, so
Yeah.
something to do. And someone got too close to where the fountain was, right?
Yeah.
And they fell through the ice, right? So myself and the other kids that were in that situation, like we figured out, we tied jackets together, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And uses a rope to get the kid out because didn't want to get close to the ice that just broke.
Yeah.
And that was something that that was an accomplishment that myself and those peers did to help someone else that was totally independent of any adult or any guardian or any authority.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, my parents grew up at a time when you could go to the store and buy saltpeter.
Mm.
And they were left unsupervised for large portions of the day. So
Mm-hmm.
I will bet you money that they know more about explosives than the average person. And they probably remember more about those explosives and the safety concerning explosives than they remember about whatever random factoids that they learned in elementary school or high school.
Right. I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, like that story about getting that kid out of the lake, right, is something that stuck with me. I don't have any fucking idea what I learned in school. Like,
Well, and my uncles learned that you shouldn't hit anything in a roaring fire with a shovel, or you might lose your eyebrows, or worse.
yes, yes, yeah,
So
definitely. Yeah, no, I mean, any sort of independence from, the group or the collective, right? To be an independent individual is ultimately a good thing because no matter how structured you want the society to be, there's always going to be a chance of individual change. So, yeah, like that concept of actually giving kids independence and independent ability is very useful. Right. Yeah, do you have any other maybe examples of that, not examples of um independence that maybe you experienced, but examples of something in Canada that seems examples of basically taking away autonomy, essentially,
no,
from
I
children.
just keep coming back to the the math that
Mm-hmm.
Gatto does in the book, where he goes, okay, here's the number of hours in the week, right? About half, or rather, about a third of that is going to be sleeping. Another close to third, or fully third, is going to be school.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have homework. Then you have meals. Then you have television, which many people watch multiple hours a day. Now that's YouTube and TikTok. That's not really much better. It's probably worse.
In some degree,
Um,
yeah.
and then when you finally pare it all down, you've got what was it, 5 hours in a week
Mm-hmm.
for a kid to do something that's not structured, that's not fed to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because all the thing that I've always disliked about television and film is it is something that is fed to you, and there are specific works. There's subsets of film and of these TV shows and even of YouTube and TikTok content. Small slices of them that want you to engage in some way beyond viewing, where it's like a puzzle or there's some amount of thought-provoking material, as long as you're sort of game for it.
Mm-hmm.
But by default, this is a medium where you just sit back and you absorb.
Hmm.
And even this, what we're doing right now, is to a certain extent that as well.
Right.
Which is why I always want to encourage people to read about these things, because reading specifically requires that you be active.
Yeah, engaging.
Because you can't passively read. You have to be transforming in your brain the words, the phrases, into some kind of structure or picture or movie or something.
Mm-hmm.
It has to turn into something, and you are the conduit for that.
Right.
And so because of that, you are forced to engage. Whereas if I put everything on the screen for you and it's all there, there's no thinking that has to go on your part. You can just absorb it and not really do anything with it.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And like, I don't know. There's no, I don't know. I don't think film and TV are inherently unengageable. I understand what you mean. It's like plays, right? Like plays are very similar in that respect.
Well, so plays used to be, they might still be now. I don't go to a lot of plays. I'll be honest. The idea behind theater is that theater is interactive. The actors will interact with the audience. There will be aspects of them that are inherently engaging, and you could write one that doesn't, for sure. But I think you lose some of the strengths of having a live performance like that if you're not playing to the audience a little bit. And it's the same with stand-up comedy, for instance, which I've seen a lot more of, where you'll get people who heckle, or the comic will ask a question to the audience, and the audience will respond, and there will be a back and forth. And now everybody's engaged, everybody's thinking about what's going on. But if I sit down and I watch, Tombstone or Gran Torino or The Godfather, there's nothing about that's going to change for that experience itself. I can go through and I can read other things about it, and I can, maybe I decide I'm going to actually read the Godfather book, and then I rewatch the movie, and now that's in that new context. But I have to put all the work in there. There's no back and forth.
Okay, I can see that. Yeah, I think that has its strengths too, in some degree. But yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah.
I'm not saying it's a write-off. I'm just saying there are limits to it.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I totally get it. I understand what you mean. The one that, so the one thing I was thinking about, this particular problem, right, is that while homeschooling could fix that problem, right, it's not going to be the sole solution, right? Like, So do you want to move on to solutions, or do you
Sure.
have anything where you want to say that? Okay. So yeah, like homeschooling could fix that problem, but I think it's a deeper problem, because I think people are afraid to allow their children to be like to not be protected.
Sure. I think there's been a lot of theories as to why that is. I don't know if you've encountered any of them per se, but obviously there's just the vulnerability of children. But I think the big driving force is, and this is something that Chesterton kind of writes about, is Christianity is the religion that created a divinity, at least in part, based around a child. Right? The Christ begins his story as a baby. There's no, well, he grew up there, and then he became this holy man. He's holy from the start.
Right.
And so, by extension of that, you have a culture that's got an ingrained sense of a divine child, and there are concerns basically that this is between this and more progressive ideas is the other one, right? We've now got a political culture that goes, well, really, all the old ideas, they're not so good. We like change. We like to constantly change things because obviously that's going to lead us to something good. Not necessarily the case, but that's the thought process. And
Right.
certainly there's been a lot that we've accomplished by changing up old things and by bringing in new things. But that doesn't mean that everything new is good. So
Right.
the issue with that fatal error and the issue with this idea of the divinity of children is we now are in a culture where to some extent the the wisdom of age is being shoved aside,
Hmm.
and now everything has to revolve around the child. In prior generations, you had like 27 kids, and you had 27 kids because you actually would have had like 45, but the others died of whatever before they hit 2.
I think 27 is
And
probably a high number, but yeah, I get what you mean.
well,
Uh,
look, uh, there's some pretty big families back in the day.
yes.
Even in my family tree, which is not that big, it's pretty alarming how the sort of generational pyramid operates, where one generation's like 10 kids and the next generation's like 3,
Right.
and you get this weird dynamic where now you have like a child or 2 children, and your entire being is meant to revolve around these people who can't possibly accept that much attention.
Right.
Um, and not in a healthy manner, at least. They might want it, but they shouldn't have it.
Right. It is not good for them to have that much attention.
No. Um, and then on top of that, there's this idea that again, like, and to some extent it's true, right? That like, okay, you're passing these things on to your kids. Your kids are going to be the ones who ultimately solve these problems because they're not going to get fixed in your lifetime. It's not for even lack of trying, right? There's some problems that we're just not going to fix in one lifetime. Curing cancer is a great example. People have been working on that for years,
I don't
and
know. I
it's
don't know
really
if they actually are working on it, but
it
that's
it,
another
it
topic.
it could be that it's all up. I'm just on the basis of charity. Let's say that they've been doing it. It is probably a very difficult problem to solve,
Yes. I
right?
think they're
Because
trying to. I do think that they're trying to solve the problem of cancer, but I don't think that they're working on cures.
sure,
Is my point.
but in the end, it is ultimately a sort of biological entropy, right? Over a long enough span of time, you eventually develop cancer,
Yeah.
and so at some point, your body stops replicating the sorts of things that it should, and it starts replicating things that are malignant,
Hmm.
and then it's sort of a countdown, right? You can cut it out, you can try to get rid of it, but it's gonna come back at some point. And so even if you elongate everybody's lifespan, you have to find some way to reverse that process or cancel it out completely. Otherwise, you're basically just ensuring that instead of dying from whatever like heart failure or like a brain aneurysm or
Do you
whatever, everyone's just gonna
do
die
you
of cancer.
watch CGP Grey?
No.
So he has this thing where he views death, basically just death in general, as
Hmm.
like this dragon, and that society is basically just like, well, we've always done it. We've always like sacrificed people to this dragon, and we just have to keep doing it. And he basically is denying the concept that one should accept that death is inevitable.
I think we'd need another episode to talk about that.
I no,
I
I agree.
definitely I've
I
definitely
know I
got
would
some
I
thoughts
would
on
I
that.
would I would like I think we should do that one as a separate topic. But
Sure.
um but in this context what I'm saying is that the very idea that we should deny like the very basis of death is extremely dangerous. in my opinion,
Yeah, I was gonna
because
say I have some very harsh words for that line.
that line of thinking. Yeah. I imagine our words would probably coincide in many ways, but the point I'm making is that I think like many people, because of that, think that they can solve these problems. Like they are going to be able to solve those problems. And many of the problems with our educational system, I think, is because of that, because of this lack of like generational viewpoints on the world, right? Like,
Well,
mm-hmm.
dragging that point, kicking and screwing back to the topic at hand, do you think that that has anything to do with the fact that nobody's allowed to fail in any catastrophic fashion?
Yeah, I do. I think that was what I was getting at. Is I think that like people are absorbed by this idea that no, they are going to be able to solve these problems, when realistically they can't, and they think that they're going to be able to solve them so that their offspring, their children, um, uh, like I'm using their children in like a societal manner, right? Like children in
Sure.
general, ought not even think about them, right? Like they shouldn't even be exposed to them because they're not a problem that children should have to deal with.
Yeah, when the reality of the situation is that eventually the people who protected them from their failures will be gone, and unless they know how to navigate them, they're gonna succumb to them.
Right.
And that's also that that gets sort of dangerously close to a couple of other topics that are kind of related to prior episodes. But I think we'll get that we'll get there eventually. Doesn't need to be today.
Yeah.
Um,
Or our children will. Anyways,
yeah,
uh, the point is that for this institution of schooling, right? I think we both agree that it is fundamentally bad. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, just as a summation, um, and I don't think that it was a very convincing book in that respect. I was very much of the opinions like, oh, well, maybe we can just change things or like move things around, and we could fix the schooling thing and like still have this institution. But I really think that the institution itself is the problem, is the malignant cancer, as it were. Uh, to go back to that as an analogy,
yeah.
um, and it is not good for society, and it's not good for any of the children that are participating in it. But I don't know what you would do. Like, I mean, basically, I think the solution is just letting parents figure out how they want their children educated on their own. I don't think the state should be involved in any way. But apart from that, like, if we already have the system, right? I don't think you're going to be able to convince people really to get rid of it, um, even if they admit to the flaws.
My phone is like a robot.
Yeah, you're breaking up. Are you still there? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just
All
kind
right.
of
Yeah, you're
lost.
having connection difficulties again.
Yeah, gotta give it a minute. Feel free to keep talking though.
Yeah, so I think the way to think about it is probably to somehow modify the system to be better, and be less intrusive and be less powerful, and less useful, really, to parents, or be viewed less usefully, I guess, maybe. Um, and in some way try and um, get parents to accept the, I don't know, I don't want to say futility, but mm, the lack of utility that's being pressed on them with the schooling. I,
Yeah,
go
it
ahead.
might come up, but it's still dropping out.
It dropped out for a second, but I was also talking over
Okay.
you. Try again.
Yeah, it's still dropping out
Yeah, it's clipping a little bit.
a little bit. Okay, that's not too bad. I think I think ultimately it's going to have to boil down in the same way that Gatto said to communities coming up with these solutions,
Mm-hmm.
where each community is going to have to be responsible for the education of the youth within that community. And that will ultimately, I mean, a lot of that's going to pass down to family sovereignty, which is probably where it should be anyway. There's obviously going to be some pitfalls with that. You know, not all parents are good parents,
Mm-hmm.
but on average, parents will be looking out for their children with better motives than some bureaucrat looking for votes,
Mm-hmm.
you know, however many miles away.
And the thing is like schooling's not going to go anywhere, right? Like if the parent feels that schooling is the best path for their children, right? Like there's still going to be like schooling organizations that exist.
There will be, I think, in terms of like federal level stuff, I think that will be bled dry as soon as people kind of, I don't want to say clue in because it's arrogant, but I think once people see more and more of these cases of uh, people not people not being able to think for themselves, or the more extreme examples, right? We were talking about this before the stream started. Uh, the number of teachers that are predators
Yeah,
and who get hidden by the system.
yeah, the amount of predation on children in these schools.
I mean, wasn't it like 2017? Like every other week, you would see an article about a teacher who slept with their students.
Yeah, that like that's true. That is really bad, also. But I think that that's probably a better argument. I don't know. Like the the way to the way to uh, get people off of schooling, right, is in some ways like an argument against like the institution of the government in your life in total, right? So I think that uh, maybe like those value governance in many cases is necessary. I don't think it is good, right? Like, and I think that that may be like definitely biasing me towards this argument too, though. So I don't know.
Sure. I think part of it though is that really when you look at the facts of the situation, when you look at studies that are done on homeschooled kids versus kids going to public schools, when
Mm-hmm.
you look at the rates of predatory teachers, when you look at the design behind the school structure in the first place,
Yeah.
none of these things are good things.
No, they're not.
And it's not
Well, the
like
other thing too is like the outcomes, which he really leans on in the book too, are actually worse with standardized schooling.
yeah,
Like, if all of if it still wouldn't be acceptable, but like if all of this was happening, but at least we were getting outcomes that were net positive, right? For
sure.
the community and the society, then I'd be like, well, okay. It's like I get it. Like we gotta fix this problem, these problems that we have, but we can't like throw the baby with us out with the bathwater, right?
That's the usual argument that I see, yeah.
Yeah, and but no, the it the baby is the problem in this case. Like the very foundations of this pact that we made with school teachers, uh, and these foundations that we've made are the problem, right? They're not these aren't symptoms of like some other societal woe, right? They are symptoms of the institution itself.
Absolutely.
So like you can't, yeah, there's no, and that is it's a very powerful argument needs to be made for people to accept that, I think.
Yeah, well, it's some people won't see it until they get hurt by the system
Mm-hmm.
directly and in a way that they can't deny.
Right.
Um, but I don't think that the goal should necessarily be, and this will be a recurring answer from me as we go over a lot of these topics. I don't think that the solution is that the majority of people necessarily see that this thing is wrong and then move to stop it. It really just it begins at the smallest level and it works out from there, right? So
Yeah.
if you get one community to do it and the whole community is doing better, maybe the neighboring communities see that and then go, okay, well, how do we beat them?
Right. Well, the other thing too, I saw this. I can't remember where I saw it, but I remember somewhere talking. I was like, oh, we have this like one side is very much all about like these central planning and stuff like that, and this other side is all about no authority and like decentralization, and they're both awful. They're both like terrible things, and I'm like, I don't know about that. I think that I'm honestly growing to think that the decentralization, like the decentralization model of society works much better. I've always thought that
Well,
really, but like the idea that we ought to bring things in to centralize them is I don't know if that's the right answer
well,
either.
people wouldn't accept it if you placed it on one of the things that isn't centralized right now. If you said to them, okay, tomorrow we're going to decide for you your toothpaste from now on is going to be Crest.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there would be a certain number of people that would go, okay, well that makes no difference to me. That's already what I use.
Mm-hmm.
But there would be a number of people who go, okay, but I need this specific toothpaste that works for
Yeah,
my specific.
I have sensitive teeth, and the
Yeah,
Crest sensitive doesn't work as well
yeah.
as the as well as the
Or I want a better whitening toothpaste, or Crest doesn't have the flavor that I want, or Crest is more expensive than the one that I buy, right?
right.
There's so many different aspects, and it's just toothpaste,
Right.
right? It's not it.
I demand Colgate. Anyways,
Yeah. So, but that's the thing is if you told me we were going to centralize all those things, they would be like, well, no, I need there to be options because I need my specific things catered to. Well, what's more complicated than teaching a child?
right.
But we're
Yeah.
going to put them all in the same metric. We're going to put
Yeah.
them all in the same class. And we're going to go, okay, well, this person's going to read out this book to you. Hopefully that's your best way of learning. And now they're trying to just flip it the other way, where they're like, okay, well, before we did it for the people who are better at like lectures and reading, and now we're going to make it for the visual learners. Okay, well, the visual learners are a minority, so now everybody's got to learn the visual learner method. I wonder what that's going to do for the people who aren't visual learners.
Right. I don't think there's actually a difference, honestly.
I think there's people who are more inclined or more interested in certain methods than others. Like if you put me in front of a lecturer, I will fall asleep.
All right, fair enough.
One
Um,
moment, I gotta step out for a second.
okay. All right, so we got a pause in the action here, folks. There's just me watching myself, but still, I fill up this dead air. In case someone watches in the future, there's there's nothing really. I don't know. There's nothing right about schooling, unfortunately. It's like there's no like I really think that's what this book really like defines. If you haven't read it, is the ability to like it really points out the problem with schooling, and it's a really good book for you to read if you if I don't know if you even think that schooling is good, right? Even if you think it's correct and right to do, like you should really be open to this person's ideas. Like he not necessarily agreeing with them, just reading them, just like seeing what they're about, because there's something very wrong with the schooling system, and it's become very evident in the recent months with all of the uproar about it. And no matter what your position is on that, like, you should not want to be controlled by the state. What your child was taught, like, if you're ultra conservative and you think that no one should talk about people being gay ever, though that's not really what the don't say gay bill actually said. Uh, if you really honestly believe that, then you don't want your kids in school. And then at the same time, if you're an ultra liberal and you think that we should teach these things to your children, you shouldn't be okay with the state telling you that you can't talk about it in the schooling, especially uh, in a schooling system that controls the majority of your child's life. Like, no matter your political position, like, having the government tell you or tell your child what they're allowed to learn is wrong. And you have to see that. Um, like, no matter what you want your kid taught, you can't have it taught as a unified like thing. Like, there's no one magic bullet. There's no panacea to education. Like, it just doesn't happen. So yeah, I hope that if you are listening to this at some point in the future, that you think about that. Like, no matter your political leanings, no matter your values, the values that are being taught in the school are not going to be yours, no matter what.
Oh, you're going over that aspect. Yeah. That's it's really it's the sort of thing where there are people who will go, well, I'll go to a place that has a better school that's more in line with my ideology, and I'll be there to talk to my kids about what they've learned that day. And it's like, okay, well, really, it doesn't have to be the whole school, right? Quite often it's not even the whole school when these teachers get caught out doing messed up stuff, right? Not all of it's even just being predatory towards kids. Sometimes it's just them clearly trying to influence the children to think a certain way, right? Or behave a certain way, or cut certain people out of their lives. And
Which is also
and
terrible.
all it takes is one, right? All it takes is one, and that person is going to be with your kid for more time every day than you're going to be able to spend with them.
Yeah.
In direct contact,
Yeah.
right? And so, and as somebody that they're supposed to look to as an authority,
Yeah.
right? That someone is supposed to teach them how the world works, which is, I mean, honestly, supposed to kind of be the parents' job, right? Is teaching your kids about the world, but now they've got this other person who certainly will change out after a year, if they're in elementary school, or possibly that they'll have for their entire time in high school, because they could take multiple classes with the same teacher. But
Yeah. I mean, elementary school, like grade 1 through 5, right? They had teachers that like stuck with students for several years too.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, like the teacher I had so like they had fourth in my elementary school, at least. They had third through fifth all in one go, all in one class. Which actually I think is really good. Like, it was a really good thing to do. But yeah, so like the students were basically like your homeroom. You had like a homeroom teacher, and then sort of like in high school or like in middle school. Yeah, actually not really in high school. They didn't have a homeroom in high school, but so they had like a homeroom teacher, and then they had other teachers that did like specific things. But the lessons were generally taught by one teacher in one classroom. So you weren't like constantly shifting from classroom to classroom. Like, you would go to other classes, but it was like very rare.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think I don't think no matter your political ideology or position on any of this, right? Um, whether you agree with like either of our political stances, right? You don't want your child taught by someone who doesn't. Um,
Well, and you certainly don't want your child taught by somebody whose beliefs are antithetical to yours.
right.
And you know, if you luck out, maybe that won't happen in your lifetime. But there's a
It's
very
more
real
likely
chance that it
going to.
could.
Yeah. Like I don't. You probably like most people would not want me to be their kid's teacher.
Oh yeah.
and and that's fine. Like that's perfectly good. And I don't think and like depending if I was like slightly different. Like if I had kids just I don't know 6 years like in my 20s, right?
Mm.
And I was talking to me now, right? In my 20s, I would not want me teaching my kids.
Yeah.
And so that would be that's a perfect example of like your positions things are going to shift and it should be people whom have a vested interest in you that are shaping you, not some person that's getting a paycheck from the state.
That's the other thing too. Is the incentives aren't really there. The incentive. I mean, obviously there are people who are intrinsically motivated. I'm not saying that there aren't, but
Mm-hmm.
the structural incentives for teachers are basically you get paid to push these kids through another year, and the schools are like that too. That's how they get their funding, and so you know there's no real reason to make sure that a child actually knows something as long as they can get a decent mark on the test. And there's a very large gulf between those two things.
Yeah.
There were tests that I passed because all I did was just raw word associate, you know, this with that. And then I went to do the test and I wrote out the test and I copied out the answers that I had copied into my head, and then I left the room and I didn't remember any of it.
Yeah, I could see that. Um, so uh, I think we covered the solutions pretty well. Um, I was really expecting most of this time to be taken up by the discussion with our friend Rob about his experiences. Um, so is there anything else you want to go over, like specifically?
Um, Not necessarily anything specific. I think just the general idea is that we need to construct. Uh, I think there's sort of two levels to the solution. Is
Mm-hmm.
sort of what I'm thinking of right now. Is there's the one level where it's like, okay, if you can go and teach your own kid, and you're willing to put in that time, by all means do it, because your kid's not really gonna end up worse for it,
Mm-hmm.
unless you like go out of your way to sabotage them,
Yeah.
um, and undermine their various uh, successes and failures.
Right.
Um, and to the extent that you can't, it would probably be great. It would probably behoove you really to find a solution. Not even necessarily take them to a private school. I'm not even saying school vouchers, although school vouchers would be a good first step.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but even something as easy as you and say four other parents pay for a tutor who's going to teach your kids.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's the homeschool pods thing are I
Yeah.
think is a lot of that sort of solution for sure. Yeah, no, I mean realistically, like what it comes down to is that the values that you have as a parent, um, like the way that you view the world and not just the way that you view the world, but like the things that you want for your child, right? Are going to come across much more clearly um, if you're able to construct a schooling environment or an educational environment that benefits them that you create, whether it's like picking a homeschool or like any of that. And I think that it is in your best interest to find educational solutions that are what you want for your child and not what the state wants for your child. No matter your view on the state, um, like your particular your particular wants and needs for your child are not going to be a catch-all, and that's what I was saying sort of in that diatribe while you were gone there for a second, was that there cannot be a panacea for education. There just can't be. It has to be individualized for each person, and no one is better in individualizing what is best for your child than the parent. So,
Absolutely. I mean, it would be a pretty sad state of affairs if you were eager to have somebody else know more about your child than you.
yeah, for sure. All right. So that was a good conversation. Thank you very much. And for anyone that watches it in the future, appreciate you listening. Thank you and have a good night.